Creepy Craigslist encounter for a kitten. So my fiancé and I have been on the lookout for a kitten to accompany our 3-month-old kitten we have already. We searched and searched until one day he said to me, "Let's look on Craigslist," so I did. We found the perfect one, but the only problem was it was 2 hours and 30 minutes away from our home. I inquired about it at around 10:30 p.m. I know it was late, but almost immediately I got a response. She sounded very nice over text and asked to see where I lived so that she would feel settled about the kitten living with us. She also insisted on going to their house. I know. I should have just dropped it. At the time I thought nothing of it. So I sent them a video. We set up a time for the next day to meet. Next day came. I wasn't going to take my fiancé, but he insisted on coming with me because he wanted to be my protection in case, since Craigslist is sketchy. So we drove 2 hours and 30 minutes on our way there. As we were on our way, I was texting this girl that we would get there on time, and she responded, "Great, see you then." We arrived to the home, me in the driver's seat and my fiancé in the passenger seat with the window down. I texted the girl and I got no response. I called and no response. I ended up calling 5 times and texting in the course of an hour and no response. I went up to the house and knocked on the door. Nothing. There was a car in the driveway, but no response from the number or the door. We got there at 6:30 and waited until almost 8. Nothing. The neighbor came out asking what was wrong. I said I'm here since I inquired about a kitten, and she said, "A kitten?" I said, "Yes, it was an ad on Craigslist." She said, "No one has kittens in this home," though I showed her the ad and she said, "Oh, I know them. They are very sketchy people and they don't own any cats. I just helped them move their furniture yesterday." So I said, "Well, on their ad it says that they have to get rid of their kitten since their new place doesn't allow pets." So neighbor said, "That's impossible. I have a dog and so does the next door over." I immediately found this creepy and assumed the neighbor was also in on something since it was too creepy and I was feeling anxious. I thanked her and left along with my fiancé. Literally immediately when we pulled out of the street, I got a text from the girl saying, "I'm just now getting your messages. Something must be wrong with me phone. Did you still want the kitten or no?" I didn't answer and we headed back home. What I don't understand is, they didn't get any money from me, but they asked me to show up not knowing I'd be with my fiancé. I had a bad feeling about it. What did they want from me? Craigslist roommate makes me the subject of a mental breakdown. About 2 years ago, I moved into a new apartment. The walls were very thin, and because of the fire safety laws in my city, my bedroom had one window, which led into the living room, and none with outside access. The window will be important later. It was 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for the master tenant, and one spare, which at the time was rented out by a pretty friendly guy. Well, friendly guy had issues with his work visa and had to move back to Canada last minute, leaving us about 2 weeks to find another roommate. Our quickest and easiest option was Craigslist. Due to my work schedule, I had no part in the selection process, but was content when the new roommate moved in a little later. He seemed a bit off, but friendly. He was a very tall, large guy but pretty quiet, and not someone I wanted to go out of my way to hang with, but was okay to be around and be cordial with. About 2 weeks into his move-in, the master tenant left for Hawaii, leaving him and I alone in the home for the month-long duration of his stay. For the first few days, things are normal. All of a sudden, about 4 days into the trip, I am woken up at about 8 a.m. to a frantic knocking at my door. Roommate, we'll call him Kyle, is standing there when I open up, looking frazzled. He looks me dead in the eye and says, "So do you want to tell me what went on last night?" To which I was shocked and confused, because I had come home from work at about 9 p.m. and immediately showered and went to bed. I explained this to him and he tells me that he heard me screaming and arguing with someone in my room. That he saw me in the side alley out the window, arguing with our landlord, whom I'd never even seen at that point, that he heard people coming in and out of our house. I tell him no way, none of that ever happened. After staring at me for a little longer, he leaves and doesn't bring it up again. The next morning, I wake up to the same thing. This time he says he saw me arguing with my boyfriend. I was single at the time, had seen me talking with our other roommate, who's in Hawaii, and asking me for the badge number of the officer I'd spoken to, since he had apparently seen me talking to a bunch of police as well. This time, I get angry and more or less tell him to cut this shit out, because I'm not doing anything and don't know what he's talking about. He gets a weird look on his face and says, "I think I had a seizure in my sleep. The next time it happens, call an ambulance." And leaves for a bit, only to start knocking again about an hour later, and when I open up, Kyle repeats the exact same story verbatim. This happens once more before I tell him to leave me the fuck alone, and leave for work. I go to work as normal, and I am reluctant to return that night but am too tired to switch to an alternate location. Big mistake. About 1 a.m., I wake up to slamming doors. Kyle is pacing back and forth between his bedroom, the living room, and out the front door. Walking in and out of each room, turning the lights on and off, mumbling angrily, and slamming the doors. I can see his figure pacing back and forth through the frosted window in my room that leads to the living room. Since my room is dark, he cannot see inside. Suddenly he screams, "I can't live like this, why are you doing this to me?" I think he's on the phone, and don't respond. A few moments later, he screams my name repeatedly and I realize he's directing it towards me. I knew I had to get the fuck out of there, so I very quietly creep out of bed and start getting dressed and packing a bag of clothes for work in the morning. I'm almost done when he screams, "I hear you," and charges over to my room, slapping the wall next to my door but not touching the door itself. I look towards my window and see his shadow lean all the way forward, pressing his ear against the glass. I was fucking terrified and sat completely still, unmoving. He eventually screams my name again and moves away from the window, and I hear him start pacing between rooms again. Now, my shoes are kept on a rack outside my door, and not inside my room, so I know that when I leave I'm going to need a moment to put them on. I decide to wait until his pacing takes him out the front door again, at which time I plan to grab my shoes, put them on and run. As I'm formulating this plan, the pacing stops. He screams, "Do you want to fucking fight about this? Come out right now and we'll fight. I swear to God, I'm very small, 5 feet 0 inches girl, and this guy is easily 3x my size, so I am definitely not looking to fight, thanks." After a few minutes, he turns off all the lights, and I hear the door to his room open and close, followed by silence. I wait for a moment to be sure I can't hear any movement, and then decide to take my chance. I took a breath, and pulled my door open quickly. I step out and grab my shoes before I look up a second later, and see him standing shirtless, with just a pair of boxers and sock on, in the dark of the hallway, his arms hung slightly outward in an awkward position. He says in a low, calm voice, "Ma'am, we need to talk." That was a hard no from me, so I grab my shoes and run out the door with them in hand. I run about a half block barefoot before I stop to put them on. When I look back, he is standing in the porch light of our front door, watching me run but not moving. Luckily, I had a friend who lived 2 blocks away, and I had their spare key, so I let myself in and crashed there for the night. And that's where I stayed for the next week or so while we worked things out with the master tenant, and Kyle agreed to move out within the week. He says he doesn't remember anything that happened, or wasn't sure if it was real or not, but if I said that's what went down then it must be real. The day Kyle left, he sends me a photo of the house key sitting on the table, and says, "I'm out, nothing else." I take a friend over there with me to scout it and ensure that he has actually left. When we get there, we discover that not only had he left a ton of food and furniture, but he had ripped all of the fire alarms out of the ceilings. He had unscrewed and removed the deadbolt to the front door, and left them lined up neatly on the front table. We then realized that my front door can only lock by using a key from the outside, and it had been locked when we arrived, meaning Kyle still had a key. We called a locksmith immediately. Even after changing the locks, I was still terrified to stay there alone afterwards, and never went to sleep at night without barricading the doors with chairs and other furniture. To this day I still fear for his safety. He was obviously psychologically unstable, but also wonder what could have happened if I hadn't been as lucky as I was. Creepy Craigslist roommate. When I was 21 I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet. But she seemed to like me, and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there we went out for pizza. And that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a, "Thanks." I mean, I look nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I look like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long awkward pause and she would give out her creepy high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom, and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt she mumbled my name. Max Barker. Max Barker, Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark, and mumbling my name, really freaked me out. And it doesn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic. But I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes she told me thanks for listening and she started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast, and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it, to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk, and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed, and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning when I went out into the hallway my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out she contacted me. I was at the movies, and my phone was off. When I got out I turned my phone on, and to my shock I received in 40+ text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" to, "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out. Bringing my boyfriend saved me from a Craigslist creep. My boyfriend wrote his version of the story a month ago, but I wrote my perspective for a comment in another subreddit and thought it would be fitting here. A few weeks ago, I had to fly out to a small town I'd never been to in order to look for a place to live. I'm moving there in the fall to start grad school. My boyfriend flew with me, and before the trip I researched all sorts of apartments on Craigslist and set up a bunch of appointments. Our first appointment was in the afternoon in this sort of remote residential area. The landlord sounded fine over email and asked me to call him an hour before the appointment to confirm that I was coming. I called. He didn't answer, so my boyfriend and I started walking to the house and just hoped that he would show up. Maybe 10 minutes before the appointment, he called me. "Are you coming?" he asked. He sounded like an older man, and had this very strange, slow way of talking, but I just thought that he was older. "Yes, we're in front of the house now." He got extremely upset. Oh yes, my boyfriend's with me. You never told me you had a boyfriend. You never said that. It had never crossed my mind to have to tell him this information, since my boyfriend would not be coming to live with me. He was just helping me look for apartments on the trip. I told the man so, and after a very long pause, he said, I'm sorry. It's just, sometimes people don't tell me when they're married. And it surprises me. I'll see you soon. Then he hung up. I told my boyfriend about what the man had said, and he was immediately weirded out. He wanted to leave, but there were slim pickings in terms of real estate at this point, so I, stupidly, said that we had to stay, in case this place was the place. As we're discussing it, we see a man leave the house we're going to view. This man was young and extremely sketchy looking, greasy hair, furtive eyes. He took one look at us and ran out of the house to his car and pulled away from the curb with a screech. Okay. So now we're really weirded out. But this isn't enough for us to bail just yet, and as we look at each other wondering what to do, the landlord arrives. He's in his 50s, very tall and very strong looking. His eyes are completely blank and empty of warmth or emotion. He slowly walks up to us and says, I'd shake your hands, but mine are dirty. What from? My boyfriend asks. Work, is the flat reply. He asks us a lot of questions about me, completely ignoring my boyfriend. The entire time he stares into my eyes without blinking. What am I going to school for? What other places am I considering for living? Is my boyfriend moving to this town too? I try to give answers that are as vague as possible. Meanwhile, my boyfriend asks the landlord questions of the same kind, which he refuses to answer. Then he says, apropos of nothing, let me show you the basement. At this point I should have noped out of there, but I didn't. I kept thinking this was an eccentric old man from a small town, we're city folk, and that we were just feeling paranoid. My boyfriend, on the other hand, wanted out of there, but he followed us as the man led us to the back of the house, away from the street, to this sort of detached shed. He opened the door and we saw that there were stairs leading down into utter darkness. He flipped the switch at the top of the stairs and the light didn't come on. Normally the response for this is, oh shit, the light's out, or something like that, but he just said, and slowly walked down into the darkness. Then he stood there, without moving, in the dark, and said, aren't you coming down? There's nothing to see if the light's out, says my boyfriend. The landlord just stands there for a long time, then slowly walks up the stairs and closes the basement door without saying anything. He took us into the house. Weird and increasingly creepy things ensued. The front door, the only exit to the house, locked automatically, and when my boyfriend tried to fiddle with it, the man got really upset and told him to leave it alone. He managed to get it open secretly, though. The man kept trying to box us into small rooms and, according to my boyfriend, kept reaching his hands into his pockets, only to take them away when he caught us looking. On Craigslist and in person the man claimed that there was a grad student already living in the house. But the evidence of that seemed arranged. There were neat piles of generic textbooks on the table, but not other things a 20-something might read. There was a bowl of fruit on the table but no other food in the fridge or pantry. Or utensils. There were maybe 3 t-shirts in the closet. This supposed grad student wasn't out of town, but the landlord couldn't say what school he went to or how long he'd been renting the house. Finally, the man had showed us every single room in the house but one. This one he refused to open, claiming it was just the attic, and we didn't need to see anything up there. He gave us several reasons when we inquired. It was unfinished, there was furniture up there, it would smell bad. This last one I believed. Because standing near the door, it smelled terrible. Finally, we made our excuses and bolted out of there. The man walked us out, pretended to go to his car to leave, and when he thought we had turned the corner, slowly sauntered back into the house. My boyfriend, fixated on the idea that there was something wrong with this guy, Googled the man that night. We found out 3 things: that he was a pillar of the community, known by a lot of the townspeople, that there was no evidence of him owning or managing a real estate company, as he claimed on Craigslist, and that he had listed his home address as the very house we had been touring, the house where the grad student lived. So that was the creepiest thing that ever happened to me. Edit/update: after talking to my boyfriend, I've decided to contact Craigslist and the police department with my info. The police say they'll drop by for a check-in and I'm still waiting on confirmation from Craigslist, but at least the ad is flagged and should, hopefully, be taken down. Thank you everyone for your words. I realized that it's better to err on the side of caution and potentially save other people from harm, if the landlord is really innocent. At worst he'll be inconvenienced. Second update, hey everybody, sorry that it's been a few days, but I've been on vacation with my family and I haven't heard anything from the police until now. They just sent me a message saying, the information you provided has been reviewed and an investigation is in progress. I will be scanning the papers and hoping they tell me about the results of the investigation, though it's probably unlikely. Third update, hi all, so the police semi got back to me about what happened when they went to the landlord's house. It is still creepy and what happened afterwards might be even creepier. Fourth update, I called the police officer and told her about the email. She said that it can probably be retrieved but I shouldn't try to do it myself because I might tamper with it further / destroy it more. She said I could bring in my laptop to the station when I move, around a month from now, but that it probably wasn't anything. But if I receive any more like it, I should screenshot it / save it. Also, to those asking, my email is not linked to my Facebook and putting my phone number / email into various search engines hasn't turned up anything about me. So there's that at least. Thanks everyone for your concern. Creepy Craigslist disabled man, medium. This happened last year around this season while I was broke and struggling to make ends meet. I had just moved out and didn't want to resort to going back to my parents. Anyways, I was so desperate I was looking on CL for caregiver / housekeeping type gigs just to make quick cash while I looked for a FT position. After responding to several, I got a bite back from a man who had advertised as a disabled man who needed help with his morning and evening routines since he had a bad back. As a past caregiver, I thought nothing of his request to help with bathing and dressing since I knew it could be difficult for some. After chatting on the phone and coming to the conclusion he was nice and normal, I proceeded to head over to his townhouse late one night to help him with his nighttime routine. He lived a bit out of the way from me, but I was desperate and didn't mind. He even said I could spend the night since he'd need me in the morning anyway. Once I got there, he was a decent-looking man in his late 30s or early 40s with a cane. He paid me $200 upfront for the expected nighttime and morning routine the next day. He explained he was ex-military and had back surgery recently. Things started to get weird once he offered me some wine and commented on how cute he thought I was. I should have seen that as a big red flag, but again I was super poor but I didn't want to cheat him so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He then led me to his bedroom where he got undressed for his evening shower. I was horrified since I saw that he already had a giant erection and wanted me to lather him up. He asked if I wanted to take my clothes off and I declined. He responded respectfully. However, he did touch my butt when I bent over to pick something up for him. I should have ran out right then but I was waiting for the right moment. After quickly giving him the most unsexy shower in the most platonic way I could, he got out and said he was heading to bed but didn't want to wear any clothes. The guest room where I was to stay was right next to his, and though I was tired I was still pretty on edge. My gut instinct was telling me to get the hell out of there. The issue was that we were on a 3-story townhouse, and we were on the top floor, and he had installed baby gates on each floor so his cat wouldn't run away. Also, he had turned off all the lights on the lower floors so it was pitch black. In order for me to get out, I'd have to pass his room. I quietly arranged my stuff in my purse while I heard his TV blaring, and to my horror I saw him walk swiftly to his bathroom without his cane. I realized he was not as disabled as he had told me, since he had previously put on an act as if he couldn't walk without it. He also still had his hard-on and was holding a giant bottle of lotion with him, as quickly and quietly as I could. I fled and ran like hell out of the room while he was in the bathroom and jumped like an Olympic sprinter over the cat gates down the dark stairs. As I threw the front door open to run to my car, I heard his house alarm go off. I got into my car as fast as lightning, heart beating like crazy. I immediately got phone calls from his number, and every car that trailed me had me terrified until I got out of there. Finally, after a 2-hour drive I was back to my place and grateful I was out of there. Who knows what could have happened if I had stayed overnight, but I didn't want to stay to find out.